first week of the tour has had its ups and downs with excitement and some boring times. And the last time we met, the sprinters are going through a changing of the guard on stage 7 with Dutchman Dylan Groenenwegen getting the spoils after a long day of racing. Stage 8 was a repeat of the same, but this time with a little more action in the final from the competing sprinters, some worrying more about each other than the finish itself. However, Sunday in Hell Part Deux lived up to the hype and gave the cycling world one of the best miles race per feet climb type races in years. With the expectation that the GC would be blown apart like a Super Dave Osborne stunt, only one GC hopeful didn't make the finish and one other missed out, but not by much. In the end, the day's stage winner gave one of the best post-race interviews, and the little GC men survived and even thrived. We break down stages 8 and 9 of the tour, preview the brutal second week in the Alps, and give some love to the women's lacrosse on tap for tomorrow as well. But first, coming up, stages 8 and 9, rest day, recap, 2018 Tour de France.
Seconds of a gap a moment ago. They can afford to take their time. Behind them, Jungels and Gilbert, two teammates of Lampard. We have Sagan, the intruder in the green jersey, and Sturven, who's with this man Degenkolb. Degenkolb is where he doesn't want to be at the minute, leading out the sprint from the front. 200 metres to go, and they have to go now. It's Degenkolb from the front in the white. On the left-hand side, the Belgian champion in the national colours, but it's another Belgian coming off the wheel at the minute. Degenkolb, though, is holding it, but here comes Van Avermaet. Degenkolb going from a long way, and he's going to do it. Degenkolb's on it. Degenkolb is back. John Degenkolb back in the big time. He was the one who was forced to lead out the sprint, and on a day of legends in Roubaix, John Degenkolb, the former winner, is back.
Welcome. This is the Between Two Wheels podcast. Your host, Tyler Janke, giving you a rest day recap for July 16, 2018. Tomorrow we head into stage 10 and hit the Alps. But first we got to do a little recap of what happened with stage 8 and 9 and a little follow-up to the big race yesterday, the Sunday in Hell. Stage 8, we had Deux to Amiens, 181 kilometers. We mentioned that one before. Stage a Cat 4 climb, another Cat 4, a sprint, the time bonus, and then the finish. 181.5 kilometers. Sprinters were licking their chops for this one. This one was pretty uneventful, save for a wreck in the last several 20 so kilometers by Dan Martin. And then a sprint finish at the end where we had a little bit of headbutting, some elbowing, and some relegations, and then another two-time winner. Stage 9 route, we know that one, Arras to Roubaix yesterday on Sunday, 154 kilometers, 15 sectors, and pretty brutal itself. Classic day in July with 15 of those sectors starting around 40 kilometers into the 156.5 kilometer stage. The last sector coming at 148 kilometers, and 12 of those 15 sectors were used in the 2018 Paris-Roubaix. So this was not just your mini tour Roubaix day. It was full blown, but maybe about half of what you'd get on April day in northern France. Deux, northern France city, population of just over 31,000. Not much to talk about there. Another starting stage was in Arras the next day. French Revolution and both world wars destroyed a lot of those cities and historical buildings. Amiens, hometown to author Jules Verne, father of science fiction, second most translated author in the world since 1979, ranking between Agatha Christie and William Shakespeare. You may have heard some of his books, Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Around the World in 80 Days. Check them out if you need to. Roubaix, well, not much to say about Roubaix. It should be known mostly for hosting the most famous one-day bike race in the world, the Paris-Roubaix. All right, let's get to some highlights. After stage 7, we really had no withdrawals. There was still 170 rider field strong. We still had the same jerseys going in. Polka Dot, Tom Squeens. Green with Peter Sagan. Best young rider, Soren Kragh Andersen. GC with Greg Van Avermaet. And the best team, I think, was still Quick Step with Lantern Rouge pulling in Lawson Craddock. Other notables into the day. TJ Van Garderen now 8 seconds back. Chad Haga at 11:30. Ian Boswell 27 minutes. Taylor Phinney at 38, Lawson Craddock hour, and 107th, as I mentioned. So, what do we have here? We had stage 8, Groenenwegen basically blasts out of the sprinters. His power and prowess on that stage was very impressive. He got in a good position, was able to come around the riders, and took a good lead up to the finish. We had Peter Sagan he had a little argy-bargy, as they might say, with Gaviria and Greipel. Greipel headbutted one rider, and then he was elbowing with Gaviria, who looked like he was trying to do a little Cavendish move around Sagan from last year, and didn't have enough room, starts putting his head, and then Andre Greipel, his nickname is the Gorilla, and it's the Gorilla for a few reasons. Maybe just one reason. He's big. You're not going to move him around. Gaviria is not quite the same size of a man, and he starts to try to headbutt and move, and Greipel's going nowhere. Plus, Greipel's kind of going ahead of him, and Gaviria just seems to be wasting his time getting the headbutt in there. Now, you could use it as a defensive move, but you can't use it as an offensive move, which it looked like Gaviria was doing. Gaviria ends up getting second on the stage. Greipel, I think, was third. Both of them were relegated. I don't think Greipel's relegation was necessary. But either way, kind of takes a little bit of the stress out of it. Just put them both back in the finish, or at the back of the pack. So you get Sagan in second, Degenkolb with a third, Christophe fourth, Arnaud Démare fifth on Bastille Day. So French rider getting about fifth place, about the best they can expect. The GC coming out of that day, Van Avermaet still in the first year. Let me just break down the GC guys that you have possibilities. Thomas. Are we going to include Geraint Thomas in the overall? Probably. I think you're going to keep continuing to put him up until he shows that he is all committed to, because he's still making comments where he's plan 2, not even plan B, but he's just plan A1 or 1A, and Froome's the other guy, so he thinks he's a two-prong attack. 7 seconds back, Van Garderen 9 seconds, or this is going into Sundays. Rigoberto Urán at 49, Valverde, Micah, it's everyone all grouped up there, same within a minute off of Van Avermaet, and we'll take that 7 seconds off of Thomas. And Nibali 112, Roglic 121, Mollema 122, Dumoulin 127, down to Quintana at 214, Dan Martin 247. So Dan Martin lost a little time. He had a nasty wreck. His team came back, was trying to help him get back up, and it just didn't look like it was. They weren't able to get him back to the finish. He lost a little bit of time, and he got clawed up pretty bad. He said something about it looked like he went in a fight with like a lion. But that's kind of the way it is. Things happen, and maybe Dan Martin, needs to recover for the next day. All right, with stage 8 out of the way, we then look to stage 9, which we were expecting some massive carnage. And the only real question was which GC rider was going to be put out of the tour completely, and which GC riders were going to be put out on time. So personally, I woke up 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time to watch the stage live and tune into the, prior to the cobbles and all the big action. But when I got up and got my coffee brewed and finally sat down, Richie Porte was already out of the tour with an abandonment, crashed just around 10K in, banded with a separated shoulder. This development basically then meant, hey, TJ, you're instantly the team leader and going for the overall. I don't even know if they had a plan B in motion, and he just seemed to be the kind of the plan super domestique. But, he's put into that position, and then, you have the situation kind of like, hey, the king's been killed, the successor's coming up, but he didn't have very long to even take the throne before he was put out of it with a crash. He gets back up. He's having a tough time getting back up to the group, and as soon as he does, he looks kind of, tired. He needs to regroup. He really didn't have much help with the chase, and then come around the corner and he crashes again. So he's got, I think he ended up crashing twice. He had 2 flats. And then the day was on. And, it was really interesting. The final outcome is Degenkolb gets the win over Greg Van Avermaet and Yves Lampert. You've got Trek Sigafredo team with Degenkolb, U.S. bike sponsor, bike team, and BMC, which is a U.S. registered team riding BMCs. Then you have Yves Lampert riding for Quick-Step, riding the U.S. specialized bikes. So interesting day out there for that. Lawson Craddock ends up hanging on. He makes the time cut, like 16 minutes. Not an issue there. Degenkolb has one of the best interviews talking about his friend that had died. He came back from an injury that would basically tore off his finger. And look, personal note, as someone who I had a finger cut off as a 1-year-old, that takes some years, and they sewed it back on, that takes some years to recuperate, and your finger's always being hit. There's always a problem. And, for him, if it's his right index finger, I think is what it was. And in the sprinting, that's kind of, you're shifting down, in the heat of battle. I don't know. They could cause it. Point is, this is some setbacks, and it's good to see him come back from that. He dedicated the victory to his friend who had died. He said like a second father. He did have a touching commentary interview, and he said it well, even through the emotions. So let's just break down some of the riders on the day and how they did. We had Bardet. He had multiple flats. He had multiple bike changes. And lots of chasing. At one point, I'm like, is he running like 21 millimeter tires with like 120 PSI? Because he was just flatting all over the place. Then he was changing his bike. Maybe, and I think he might have severe wind burn from all the whipping of the wind coming off the cars and motorbikes that were pacing him back into contention. Dan Martin seemed to have no problems. Quintana and Valverde, no real issues. Thomas had no issues. Froome, he did crash over Moscon at one point in the corners and the cobbles. But he was back up pretty quick. There's an interesting picture of him, like legs spread, flying over the top. He seemed, and it's been going around online, but he seems to have had some crashes that are just in the right places this year, which, that's kind of the luck issue. Fuglsang, I think he had one time he was chasing back. Iran was doing a great ride until the last, 10, 15. He got it caught up in a wreck, I think, on Alaphilippe that had gone down, and he went down and he had to get up. Little change. He had the team come back. He had Taylor Phinney drop out of the front group, Sepp Van Mark drop out of the front group, and he had a good team going, but they just could not close the gap. But what was interesting is, and we'll talk about this a little bit, Landa crashed on the tarmac all by himself, getting a bottle, not on the cobbles. He gets back on. He's got a team around him. Bardet goes down or gets a flat. He gets a horrible change. He jumps in with the Landa group, and that, with 2K, they're still 45, 50 seconds off of the main group, and mysteriously they are there at the finish. Yates, no big issues. Dumoulin, no big issues. Barguil, no big issues, weirdly. Zakarin had one at one point. I even saw Kittel dropping back to help him out. So a lot of these teams, we talked about that, they're in the classic mode, but they stepped it up on some of these classic riders to help their team out. Van Avermaet did not do so. He just buried himself, put himself up in the front looking to win. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, Devoncol, Lampert, Van Avermaet, they took off. They got about a 1 minute up there before they started playing games near the finish. Devoncol comes from the front, takes the sprint on from the front, never relenting, gets the win over Greg Van Avermaet and Lampert. Another little section of riders coming in with Sagan, Gilbert, Stuyven, and Jungels, and then the rest of the group with Greipel, Bosenhagen, DuPont, Christophe, and all the GC guys coming in as well. There's a little break in there. Landa, they show him at 34 plus seconds. Vermote, Seberg, Van Aert, and those guys, Bardet, 34 seconds. Which is just, the leaders, the 27 seconds. So there's just 7 seconds different from them to the main field, which is just crazy to see. And the time gaps did not grow out from there at all. What do you have from this? Well, you have basically Richie Porte obviously getting knocked out of the Tour. You had TJ Van Garderen getting knocked out of any GC hopes. And everyone else kind of solidified. And, these little guys, Dan Martin puts up at the end of the day. That was awesome on a picture. And all these guys, dirt filled, some pretty intense cobbles. But, what do you expect? These are actually good riders. I mean, you don't get to win the Tour and go down some of these descents in the packs that they do and do all these racing without being able to handle your bike. So even Quintana and some of these guys, you're like, oh, little guys. Well, look at, you had a few things going on there. Gudin, by the way, was off the front for quite a while. He did that. He won Trobro Leon, which is like a dirt Strada Bianca type thing. You have Bardet, who's coming back constantly to the field, running over the cobbles. He was second place this year in Strada Bianca. So those are two guys, the point is, there's some of these riders you don't expect, but, Bardet, maybe we should expect, based on the fact of how he's actually done in some of these weird types of races. Okay, so GC gets totally flipped up. Van Avermaet extends his lead. The only one GC rider that extended their lead yesterday, that can be in the overall, Dan Martin. He ends up getting a few seconds on the bonus sprint. Anyway, Van Avermaet increased his to 43 over Geraint Thomas. Gilbert Jungles moved up a little bit. He's in fourth place at 50 seconds. Valverde in there. Let's go down away. You've got, because TJ lost almost 5 minutes, so he's now at 30th place at 6:05. Dan Martin 24th at 3:22. Iran down to 2:53. And Quintana 2:50. So there's, once again, I don't know if Thomas is still in it, but you take about 40 seconds, and those guys are still kind of bunched up in there, and still within it, in the possible realm of being in the Tour. One little mistake can happen still, and you never know who in the lead group could be caught out. Some winners. Dylan Groenenwegen, unless, he crashed in stage 9 as well. So we'll see if he's actually able to finish. Tony Martin had to bow out due to a fracture or something of his spine from stage 8. So he's not a winner, obviously, but I was just going over some of the wrecks we had here. All the GC riders basically were winners except for Port and TJ to a great extent. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Degenkov, obviously a winner. He really felt like he needed this. And, you saw a lot of teams, the GC teams like Movistar with all their guys basically up in there in the front. They didn't get the win, but they've got to feel like they did. I think that's why you have such elation from Dan Martin as well. Some of the losers, Team BMC, they lost all their GC hopes. I mean, they're all gone. But their tour, in a sense, was kind of saved by Van Avermaet being in yellow since stage 3. We'll see if he can actually defend it tomorrow. He might be able to do a little bit. And also they had a new announcement that they merged with CCC, the Polish team, for the next few years. Things that make you go, Well, as I just mentioned, new BMC, CCCC team merger. The breaking news out today from Jim Akowitz is that they signed a deal with that team. We're not sure where that team is going to be licensed, which country, but they do have an ongoing contract signed with them, and there will be an existing team. So no bike sponsor, they mentioned, so no BMC, obviously. There's a report that BMC is to Dimension Data, perhaps. Is there a Polish bike team out there, or bike sponsor, bike company out there? I haven't heard of it. There is one, but I don't think they make good bikes. It was also reported that Greg Van Avermaet signed with the team. Port's gone to Trek, TJ to EF Education First. That's the deal. So they're kind of looking at a team with no GC rider. They're GC-less for the next few years from now on. No GC rider, no bike sponsor. Hey, look, bikes are available. They bowed out from the Fortuneo Samsic team, so maybe they're available. Also, if BMC is going to Dimension Data, then perhaps you have Cervelo that would be available for the CCC team. Chris, I was mentioning back and forth with him, and he seems to think maybe Giant. All right, so we can keep your eyes out there for a good Polish bike that this team can maybe take. He also suggested, hey, how about they just bring their own bike, and then we paint them team colors. So, BYOB, bring your own bike. All right, another thing that makes you go, is Bardet. He uploaded his ride to Strava. Matt White commented on how in the world was it possible for Bardet to rejoin the front group when he did, and how he did, stating also that TV2 helped him out. I'm not sure what he meant by TV2, if he was saying that the TV Moto was helping him, or that maybe it was just the producer chose not to, because I rewatched it today, and they would show close up on Bardet, but they were not showing at all how he was getting help back up to the group. Matt White's basically saying that they were being towed back up. No penalties were obviously given. Either way, it was suspicious. When I was watching it today, the team on the front, Sagan's taken off. You have Dan Martin's doing attacks. Dumoulin was doing attacks. This is all in the last 2 or 3K, and somehow and Iran wasn't getting any help other than motorized help. But somehow Bardet's group comes back, which was a little fishy. Either way, the headlines seem to confirm something nefarious, because Bardet, he uploaded his Strava and it recorded a max speed of 136 kilometers an hour. But then a little breakdown of that, however, showed that was a time when he had been swapping bikes, which he had been doing a lot. And that was actually one time it was on the car and left his Garmin running. And there was also a motor doping issue. I guess Scoins, at one point, and I have not seen the video. I just heard it remarked and read a little bit about it, where evidently his wheel was running around. We'll have to see. It seems a little far-fetched to me to have, and I'm sure, with all the checking, they're all over that. Actually, I hope the UCI does check that bike specifically so that we can kind of put that one to bed. All right, what's coming up? Preview of what's coming up tomorrow. You have Stage 9, Annecy to Le Grand Bernard. 159 kilometers. You have a 5 categories climbs. You have 4, starts out with a Cat 4 up the Col de Bluffet, 1.5K at 5.6. So it's not too bad. And actually we'll go over the La Course because they do that climb as well. Then you hit a Cat 1 climb at the Col de Cordefeu, 11.3 kilometers at 7%. That's a pretty famous climb. It's going to be hurting. That crests at about 43K in. So you're going to probably see some guys, go over that first one, try to get a springboard and see what we have for a break on the day. Then you have the HC category, Monte du Plateau des Gilets. It's 6K at 11.2%. So that's a steep one. And that one actually has gravel. So that will be an interesting one. The women do not do the Croix de Fer or this Col des Gilets. So that one crests over at 70K. So the first 70K, we've got 3 climbs, 1 Cat 1, 1 HC. So it's pretty loaded up at the front. And it's, unless Froome decides to do his thing 80K out, it's probably a little too far for a lot of the action. They do still have some lumps that you're going to be going over, but then they have a sprint in between the Cat 4 and the Cat 1. So look for Sagan to still be able to get that. Then they finish with 2 Cat 1s, starting at around 121 kilometers in of the 158. That's the first one up the Col de Romont. It's 8.8 at 8.9%. So that's pretty steep as well. Then they do the Col de Colombier, 7.5K at 8.5. So those are both some brutes. Cat 1 climbs. Problem is you then have roughly 13 or so K into the finish of downhill and then some flat. And so it'll be interesting to see how they come up on that. Like I said, there is a bonus intermediate sprint, but no bonus sprint, and it comes early. Notes on the climb, you obviously had, like I mentioned, you have gravel. It's a steep one. I'm not sure how steep the parts are in the gravel. And then on the course, it's similar to the men's, but there's at 112 kilometers. They're skipping the Col de Croix and the gravel portion as well. All right, so that should be an electric day, and you're probably going to see a little bit more, coming off the rest day. You always have some people that fare well and some that don't. The course, let's go over that real quick for the women. You have 20 teams, 112 participants. They do a similar thing up from Annecy. They skip the Croix de Fer. They skip that. There's another big loop that the men do out kind of to the west and north. And then before they hook up. And so the women do 2 valleys there instead. So, but they still do a Cat 4, a Cat 2. The one that's different is a Côte de Saint-Jean-de-Six. And it's a 5.5 at 4.9%. The first climb is the same as the men, 1.5 at 5.5. Then they have the Col de Ram, which is 8.8 at 8.9%. And then the Colombier, 7.5 at 8.5%. So that should be a beast as well. Same finish. And you're getting some of the women. The Giro Rosa just finished. So you're getting some of the women that came off of that. Some of the other ones that are fresher coming out of other things. It should be a really good race. Riders a note. Annemiek van Vleuten, who just won the Giro Rosa, Mitchell and Scott team, her teammate Amanda Spratt, who also did well. The Giro Rosa went over the Zoncolan, so that's a pretty brutal climb as well. Katie Hall, who did not participate in the Giro of UHC, just put this one of note. Edwig Patel, the Cognis Mettler Pro Cycling Team. I think she's like 50. She did Tour Gila, which also did Redlands, and she did well at Gila on these climbing, but she's like a French lady at 50. You gotta wonder. Taylor Wiles, Trek Drops, Ashley Mullin and Paisio, Cervelo Bigelow Pro Cycling Team. She was, I think, second at the Giro Rosa. Cassia Neodoma, Canyon SRAM, and a few others. So that should be a good race. I think tune in. I believe NBC is doing that one right before. So hopefully you get to check this out before the race itself. Anything else? No. No feedback, mailbag. I'm still looking for some of your input. So, all right, folks, that's episode 80 of the Between Two Wheels podcast, your cycling news, commentary, analysis, and interviews from NorCal. And as always, subscribe to the show, share it on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbeam, whatever podcast service you have. And for this week, we are not on the YouTube on this episode, but we'll post it there, the audio version, though, and then keep looking for us in the future times. Interact with us on Facebook page by searching Between Two Wheels, and the links and can also be found in the show notes at the description of the feed. All right, so we've got stage 9 in the mountains, stage 10, and stage 11. I think 11, Thursday, I believe they go up. So we got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday is going to culminate up the Alpe d'Huez. Not on the weekend, but it'll still be a party because that's how France goes. And they just won the World Cup, so they're looking to celebrate. And that's maybe the most vaunted one you have bet. So look for that and take care.